You don't want to just plug in. This is a DI box, humongous, solid, beefy bass, the high Z. It is okay to cheat. This is a P bass. I do play bass with a pick. Breaking the rules today. Flat wound or round wound. I don't use an amp in the room. Reverb pedal on it. I use the snark. Think more like a bass player. Not even close to that red. What's up, guys? It's Yusuf. Welcome to part 3 of the music production tutorial series, where I go step by step and show you how to build a track up from scratch. So I'm taking you inside the music making process, showing you how to record music, how to produce music on a budget. I'm not doing this in a big fancy studio. I'm doing this in my, for all intents and purposes, bedroom studio. So we've already programmed drums. Last time we put on some acoustic guitars, and today we put on some bass. It's not plugged in. So we'll be showing you how to record bass today. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to bass, actually, let's put the bass away. You don't want to just plug in. When you're using bass to record into your interface or your mixer, you'll be using a TS, tip sleeve instrument cable, standard guitar cable. You don't want to just plug this in. There are exceptions to that, but you want to use something like this. You can get a smaller one. This is 4-channel, but this is a DI box, direct input box they call it, or direct injection, I think the British may call it. Anyways, so what it does is it just changes the impedance, because a bass guitar or an acoustic guitar that is pickup, or an electric guitar for that matter, are instrument level signals. So you don't want to just feed them directly into an interface unless that interface has certain buttons on it and certain capabilities, which I'll show you in a second. But usually you'll want to plug into this DI box. So you'll input your 1/4 inch here. This is a channel 4. And then you'll have an output as an XLR. So you'll be inputting unbalanced and you'll be outputting balanced. And it will also change the signal from instrument level to mic level. You also have a parallel output on this one. All DI boxes have different capabilities. This one has a ground lift and a attenuator, a pad. You can turn it down. But the main reason you do this is if you just plug your bass into a mixer or an interface, you'll probably get a thin, kind of wimpy, weak signal. And we want a fat, humongous, solid, beefy bass sound. So we want to invest in a DI box. They sell them passive. This is a passive one. That means there's no transformer in the box. They also sell them active, so they're powered. They use a power source. It's up to you. It's a difference between solid state and tube microphone, or solid state and tube amplifier. It just changes the tone. It's a personal preference. I use a passive DI. So that's the first thing, is plug into a DI and then plug into your interface. Don't just plug in. The exception to this is if you have a mixer that has a high Z input on it. Now come on over to the mixer and I'll show you what I mean. This particular mixer is a Soundcraft Signature 12 mixer, and if you look at these channels here, you can actually plug in. You could, like, I wouldn't plug into channel 4, okay? You don't want to just directly plug in like that. But on channel 5 and 6 on this particular mixer, you have what's called a high Z, and that is basically acts as a DI. So that's turning instrument into your mic or whatever level that could be received. If you have a console or mixer that has a high Z, then you can plug directly in. Otherwise, use a DI box. Sometimes it'll say instrument. So if you see this one says high Z, that's where I go. So, okay. The next thing we talked about last time, room acoustics. Your speakers matter a lot. If you need to have this. Trust me, you need this acoustic treatment, this special insulation. It's kind of expensive, but it's cheaper than a microphone or cheaper than a new guitar, and it affects everything you do, and especially for bass and low-end instruments like kick drum and low end of the piano and all kind of things, especially bass. If you want your low end, tweaked and sounding right, you need to have a room that is tight and well treated and low reverb, because the low end is one of the hardest things to get right. And if you notice in the corners, my corners, they're just full of this yellow OC 703, Owens Corning 703 stuff. So when you're recording bass, that's one of the most important things, to just have as many bass corner traps. Don't get those foam ones, those Auralex ones. No hate to Auralex, those have their place, but any kind of foam, all it treats is the higher end frequencies, and it doesn't do anything to the low end frequencies. And you really want this type of insulating material covered with cloth, and that's going to get you your tight low end. The reason you do that is so that the speakers are accurate and you can hear the low end clearly. So you got your DI, you got your room tuned. The next thing I want to say is it is okay to cheat. If you don't have budget, you can use headphones. If you don't have, I think it was maybe $1,000 to treat this room. If you don't have that money to, I understand some people can't spend that on treatment, or you have a room that is temporary. You can't, you're not allowed to build and put things in. You can get a pair of these. These are Shure SRH 840 mastering mixing headphones, and I like them because, as you see, I just did it. If the cord runs out, you spend I think $15-20 and replace it, and then these headphones are pretty heavy duty. They give a really good low end sound on the bass, and that just goes in like so and then twists. So you can get away with these for recording bass. To be honest, I usually wear these when tracking bass. I'm too lazy to put the speakers on. But when I mix, I use the speakers. Well, let's talk about the bass itself. Actually, the onboard electronics affect the sound a lot more than the instrument does. The neck does affect the playability, and that affects the player and therefore the tone and so forth. But the electronics really affect it quite a bit. So you have, in this one, this is a P bass. You might use a J bass for jazz, or any Rickenbacker. There are a number of types of basses. I prefer P bass for the kind of music I do, indie kind of folk acoustic music. It's just preference. They're different, just like you have different guitars for different styles, you have different basses for different styles. This one has a volume knob and a tone knob, and I like to roll the tone knob back on this one. That's just what I do. I'm showing you how I do what I do behind my process of recording bass. So I did mod this bass. The bridge is new, and these are Seymour Duncan pickups that I have in here, and that affects the magnets here. The pickup magnets affect the tone when you're recording bass. Consider upgrading your electronics if you're not happy with your bass. I would prefer a cheap bass with good electronics than a really nice bass with crappy electronics. That's just what I would prefer. Okay, the next thing is actually to do with the playability, and let me just preface this with a disclaimer. I am not a master pro bass player. I'm a guitar player, piano player, singer. Okay, I do play bass with a pick. My philosophy is it was good enough for Paul McCartney. So some people are very purists about, oh, you should only play bass with your fingers. I tried to do that, and I'm just not a master at that, and I didn't have the patience, and I already have good picking technique from playing guitar. So I decided to just play bass with a pick and just break all the rules. We're breaking the rules today. Anyways, if you play with your fingers, it's fine. The way that you play, whether you play with a pick or your fingers, the nuance on your right hand really determines way more of the bass tone than you think. Like whether you're playing light on the string or heavy. You'll see, I'm going to perform coming up, and you'll see just how nuanced that right hand needs to be. So that's really where you need to work a lot on your bass playing, so that whether you're using your fingers or you're using your pick, that does change the sound of the recording. So make sure that you're paying attention to that. Next thing I want to talk about is string types. So the type of strings that you use on bass matter quite a bit more than they do on electric or acoustic guitar. They matter on guitar, but on bass they really make a difference, and they're expensive. These are $50 strings. I use these Diodario warm, mellow, flat wound strings. They're a regular light gauge. Like I said, I'm not a pro bass player. I just do it from time to time as I need on my own tracks, and I don't want to tear my left hand up with heavy bass strings. So I use the lighter gauge. You can have flat wound or round wound. They just give different tones. I prefer the more warm, vibey kind of bass sound that I would get in a folk or rock song, so that's why I use the flat wounds. So the next thing we'll talk about is using effects pedals, using amps. When you record bass, you always want to record a DI, and a lot of times that's all they use. In fact, that's all I use. I only use the DI signal, the direct inputted signal, and that's my bass sound. you know, and I might mix it with effects and things later on. A lot of people do record DI in combination with recording with a bass amp at the same time. So in that case, you'll get a blend. You'll get kind of the crunchy room sound of the amp, and you'll get the kind of clean, fat sound of the DI, and you can blend those together. I don't do it. I don't find a need for it. If you ever do need to use an amp, but you did not record an amp, you can also use a reamp box. And I did a whole video showing you how to reamp bass, how to reamp drums, how to reamp everything. I showed you how to use a pedal board, actually, how to even reamp guitar pedals with this Radial Studio reamper JCR1. I never have found a reason to do it. Honestly, I just record the DI and that's enough for me. An alternative to using an amp, if you're trying to get, usually you're using an amp to get that kind of gritty like rock sound, like in certain genres like metal or hard rock, or maybe even some kind of progressive music, or things where you kind of want a distinctive sound on the bass and you really want to dial in. And if you have access to a really nice studio and a really nice room and you want to dial in a nice sound on the amp, go for it. But if you don't have access to all that, you can also run your bass through effects pedals. So like, you know, a bass will go through guitar pedals just like a electric guitar one, and you can see over there the pedal board. You know, if you were to run your bass through, say, a Sans amp over there, that would be pretty similar sounding, in my opinion, to running it through an amp in the room. If you put that with maybe that reverb pedal, yeah, if you put that reverb pedal on it at the same time that you put the Sans amp on it, you would get a pretty good kind of amp room sound. You could also use something like a blues driver just for a quirky effect or something. Like, I never honestly had to do that. I just, like I said, I go with the direct sound, but I'm just telling you what people do. You can also buy special effects just for bass, special pedals made for basses, and some of them usually include a direct input into it. So you'll input your guitar and it'll come out XLR. So that's how you get kind of that fuzzy, distorted, warm, kind of crunchy sound. Basically, bass recording is actually one of the more straightforward parts. It's easier than recording acoustic guitar because, as you'll see, I'm just plugged in and I can listen back on the speakers because there's no mic. That's one of the other reasons I don't use an amp in the room. Bass recording is pretty boring. Yeah, honestly, it's straightforward, but it's the glue in between the drums and the rhythm section and everything else in your track, your piano, your guitar, your vocals. It's a sandwich. It's the glue that holds it all together, and you might not even notice the bass in a track. You just notice that you're bumping your head. That's usually the bass line, and it's so important. The rhythm of bass playing needs to be right on point, right on the beat, and the feel and the vibe needs to lay back a little. Some of the famous bass players throughout history are James Jamerson, Motown bassist, one of the most prolific, incredible bassists. Check out some of his bass lines. Paul McCartney, obviously, you know, Beatles, Sting, you know, many famous singers were also bass players. So incidentally, they usually ended up always playing guitar later. So as always, before you record your bass, you want to use some kind of tuner. I use the Snark clip tuner, and that gives me a reliable, quick way to tune my bass. And especially in Kuwait here, where air conditioning is on and the humidity is always fluctuating, the instrument's always going in and out of tune between takes, so that really keeps me in tune in real time. You don't want to play your bass lines like a guitar player. Especially if you are a guitar player, don't play them like you play your chords. Try to practice a little before the track. Think more like a bass player. Try to write kind of a line. If you can play piano, that's particularly useful to come up with bass parts on your left hand. Try to kind of write a line, and you'll see the line that I wrote for this song coming up now. So now we're going to show you performance, and we'll do the track, and you'll see it. If you find value in this video, please like the video and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Really love you guys for following these tutorials. One thing I wanted to mention before we actually record is when we're getting the tone. I showed you last time in the how to record acoustic guitar video, but I'll show you again. You want to get the proper gain staging. So if you take a look at the meter here, you know, you don't want to get past this, you know. I'm about halfway up, you know, I'm reaching a good -20, my peaks are -10 at the most. I'm not even close to that red. So that's how you want to gain stage. If it was too high or too low, you would just pull the gain back like that. On this particular preamp, you have an input gain and you have an output gain. So you could pull either of them down or up to taste. So, and as you see, I'm using the high Z instrument input as we talked about in the beginning. So that's how you do gain staging when you're doing bass recording. So let's get on with the track. Next week, we're going to show you pianos and organs, and we're going to go over to the Nord over there, and we're going to show you how to dial in organ sounds and pianos and Rhodes and all that kind of stuff. And that's the extra, that's the super glue. The bass is the glue, the keyboards are like the super glue that really, that's the, the melting pot. Okay, guys.